right, is this thing working? Am I on? Will I be able to see comments? Where is this? Sorry, it's been a while since I've done this. I can't see any comments. Sorry, still trying to figure out what's going on here. I don't know what's going on. Is anybody even here? Christopher, message me and tell me if somebody's here. Why it's not letting me see comments. Hold on. Haha. There we go. Yay, you can hear me. I can see you all. Um, Sorry about that. It's been a while since I've done a Facebook Live. All right, so hello everybody. My name is Jax West, and I run Stephen Avery Project. Also, I have Justice with Jax, and then we've got our closed group titled MAM Gossip. For those new, MAM stands for Making a Murderer. And people always ask me, who am I? I am nobody. Yeah, people always ask if I'm related to the family. No, and I don't like the family. So how about that for some honesty here? So, oh my God, I'm so sorry. It's so late for people outside of the states. Oh, and Brandon's from Illinois. So we got the decision today from the appeals court. I did post the link earlier today where you could go and read this for yourself. Christopher, our moderator, if you could post the link in the comments too, so if anybody would like to go read this for yourself. It is 22 pages long. What is this? Printed a page that there's nothing on. I am not going to read the entire thing because the first 7.25 pages is just rehashing the case. So I am going to start on page 8 where it says discussion. And when I am reading, I'm not necessarily looking up and seeing your comments or your questions. So I'm not ignoring you. It's because I can't see it. And just my mouse froze. All right. Because I was trying to scroll up and it won't let me. Hold on. Let me pull this up here since now this won't go. Okay. Here we go. Discussion. The issue in this case is whether Avery's Wisconsin Statute 974.06 motion was sufficient on its face to entitle him to an evidentiary hearing. And all an evidentiary hearing is you've got new evidence. Let's get in court and discuss this new evidence, right? And we've got plenty of new evidence, but it's also old evidence because it is people who came forward back when this alleged crime happened and Manitowoc just buried it. So, before I get back to that, as I see somebody, because I get notifications on my phone every time somebody makes a comment somewhere on Stephen Avery Project. And so somebody's talking again. We get this all the time on a president should pardon him, whether or not it is our current president or the president that's about to take over next week. Sorry, that's my bestie. The president can't do anything on this case. President can only pardon on federal level. This is a state level. So it doesn't matter Republican or Democrat, and where you stand, a president can't do anything for Stephen. Only the governor can. And the governor has said that he won't. So, all right, let me go back to reading this. Sorry, distracted. As a threshold matter, we observe that on appeal, Avery makes no argument regarding the sufficiency of his pleaded Brady or interests of justice claims. I also don't read when they cite other cases, so I don't care. We will therefore not consider them further. And I haven't read this. I always wait until I'm on here. So this is all new to me. All I know is he was denied. And Christopher told me I'm going to get pissed when I read some of this stuff, which is usually the case. As to Avery's newly discovered evidence claims and whether his motion was sufficient to entitle him to an evidentiary hearing, sufficiency of a post-conviction motion is a question of law, which we review de novo. If the motion is conclusory, or if the record conclusively demonstrates that the movant is not entitled to relief, the circuit court may deny the motion without a hearing. In his motion, Wisconsin, Avery alleged he had newly discovered evidence from a new witness that, quote, provides the direct connection between Bobby and the Halbach murder and planting evidence to frame Mr. Avery, unquote. We set that batch down. When seeking a new trial based on the allegation of newly discovered evidence, quote, a defendant must establish by clear and convincing evidence that, 1, the evidence was discovered after conviction, 2, the defendant was not negligent in seeking the evidence, 3, the evidence is material to an issue in the case, and 4, the evidence is not merely cumulative, unquote. Once those 4 criteria have been established, the court looks to whether a reasonable probability exists that a different result would be reached in a new trial, unquote. The circuit court determined that the Sawinski evidence satisfied the first 2 prongs of the newly discovered evidence test. Evidence was discovered after Avery's conviction, and Avery was not negligent in seeking the evidence. However, the circuit court stopped its newly discovered evidence analysis after it determined Avery failed to demonstrate that the evidence was material to his third-party perpetrator defense. And then there's a footnote, and the footnote says, Avery's brief to this court incorrectly states the circuit court found that, quote, Avery satisfied all the elements required to admit his newly discovered evidence, but for the materiality requirement, unquote. Because the circuit court found that Avery's motion failed to meet the materiality requirement, it did not reach the 4th prong of the test or determine whether a reasonable probability existed that a different result would be reached at trial. Now back up. Third-party perpetrator evidence is only material if it would be admissible under Denny. Fuck Denny. On appeal, Avery argues the circuit court erred by only analyzing the materiality of his newly discovered evidence within the confines of a third-party perpetrator defense. He argues, quote, in determining that Mr. Avery's new evidence could only be material to the issue of a potential third-party suspect, the court completely ignored its inherent materiality to other material issues in Mr. Avery's case, unquote. To the extent Avery's post-conviction motion could be interpreted that the Sawinski evidence was independently material of any third-party perpetrator defense, we conclude his motion is sufficiently pled. Avery only analyzed the Sawinski evidence within the context of a third-party perpetrator defense. As one example, the 4th prong of the newly discovered evidence test requires a defendant to establish the newly discovered evidence is not cumulative. In regard to that prong, Avery offered a single sentence, quote, the Sawinski evidence provides for the first time the missing direct connection to Bobby as a third party suspect for Ms. Halbach's murder and is therefore not cumulative, unquote. Avery did not offer any analysis that explained why his newly discovered evidence was not cumulative outside of his third party perpetrator defense. As another example, in Avery's analysis of whether a reasonable probability exists that a different result would be reached at trial, Avery argued, quote, if Bobby is established as a viable third-party Denny suspect, the forensic evidence in this case is completely undermined. The newly discovered evidence that Bobby was in possession of Ms. Halbach's vehicle means that he had opportunity and access to plant evidence in the vehicle and from the vehicle. Because Bobby has been directly linked to the murder of Ms. Halbach, there is a reasonable inference that he planted the bones in Mr. Avery's burn pit. This new evidence creates a reasonable probability that, had the jury heard the new evidence, it would have had a reasonable doubt to the defendant's guilt. Therefore, Mr. Avery should be granted a new trial. Again, Avery did not offer any analysis that explained why his newly discovered evidence created a reasonable probability of a different outcome on retrial that was independent of his assertions that Bobby murdered Halbach and framed him for it. The The circuit court properly recognized Avery's newly discovered evidence was not independent from Avery's attempt to meet Denny and addressed whether the evidence was material within the confines of his third-party perpetrator argument. Avery next argues the circuit court erred by denying his post-conviction motion because he asserts his newly discovered evidence satisfied Denny's legitimate tendency requirement and established Bobby murdered Halbach and framed him for it. Avery contends the circuit court erroneously imposed a substantial certainty requirement and misapplied Denny in its evaluation of whether Avery's proffered evidence satisfied the Denny elements of motive, opportunity, and direct connection. As stated previously, third-party perpetrator evidence is only material if it would be admissible under Denny. Under Denny, the defendant must show a legitimate tendency in the third party committed the crime, which is demonstrated by establishing the third party had motive, opportunity, and a direct connection to the crime. A defendant's offer of proof on these prongs is insufficient if it merely establishes a bare possibility that the third party could have been the perpetrator. We will start with motive. Quote, motive refers to a person's reason for doing something, unquote. In evaluating the motive prong, we ask whether the, quote, alleged third-party perpetrator had a plausible reason to commit the crime, unquote. In his post-conviction motion, Avery asserted Bobby had motive to kill Halbach because Bobby searched for violent pornographic images on the family computer. On Bobby's computer, not family computer, which established Bobby had an obsession with violence and was more likely to commit murder. In support of his theory, Avery first alleged in his motion that there were, quote, 1,625 violent pornographic images, unquote, recovered on the Veli CD. He stated the recovered pornographic images, quote, depicted violent images of the torture and mutilation of young females, unquote. These statements are not supported by the record citations offered by Avery in his post-conviction motion. His computer expert's affidavit, which he cites in support of his first proposition, does not establish that there were, quote, 1,625 violent pornographic images, unquote, on the Dassey family computer. The report simply states there were, quote, 1,625 additional images categorized as recovered pornography, unquote. Nothing in this affidavit established that each recovered pornographic image was, quote, violent, unquote. As for Avery's next assertion that the recovered images, quote, depicted violent images of the torture and mutilation of young females, unquote, Avery cites pages from his computer expert's affidavit in support of that proposition. However, again, the page citations offered by Avery do not establish the pornographic images were, quote, violent images of torture and mutilation, unquote. At best, the citation provides that the Veli CD contained, quote, 2,632 search results for terms. Here are the terms. Blood, 1 result. Body, 2,083 results. Bondage, 3. Bullet, 10. Cement, 23. DNA, 3. Fire, 51. Gas, 50. Gun, 75. Handcuff, 2. Journal, 106. MySpace, 61. News, 54. RAV, 74. Stab, 32. Throat, 2. Tires, 2. These search terms in no way establish that the pornographic images were, quote, violent images of torture and mutilation, unquote. That being said, we recognize the record does at least suggest there were some pornographic as well as gory images found on the Dassey family computer, Bobby's computer. We will therefore assume, for purposes of Avery's post-conviction motion, that there were some quantity of what could be classified as violent pornographic images found on the communal computer. They are really pushing to try and make this look like Bobby did not have control of this computer, aren't they? However, even with that assumption, the fundamental problem with Avery's motion is that he fails to tie these violent pornographic images to Bobby. In his post-conviction motion, Avery attempted to tie these images to Bobby by arguing that because Bobby routinely worked night shifts and was at home during the day from 7 a.m. to 3:30 p.m., while other members of his family were routinely at school or at work, it followed that Bobby conducted the searches for these images. This is conclusory and speculative. And there's a footnote that says, in support of his assertion that, quote, there is sufficient evidence that it was only Bobby who had access to the Dassey computer during the day on weekdays between approximately 7 a.m. to 3:30 p.m., unquote, Avery offers, in part, a record citation to a state's brief. In the record citation offered by Avery, the state argued, where the heck does that go? Oh, I guess it has to be the footnote on the bottom of the back page. The computer was accessible to numerous people. Brendan Dassey, Blaine Dassey, Scott Toddock, Brian Dassey, Bobby Dassey, Barb Yanda, and Tom Yanda all either lived in the house or had visited the house up until October 15, 2005, when Tom Yanda moved out. The 4 Dassey brothers and Barb Yanda lived in the residence from October 31, 2005 to March 1, 2006, when Brendan Dassey was arrested. Stephen Avery was a regular visitor to the Dassey house, giving him access to the computer as well. Bullshit. That's complete bullshit. Because again, it was already said. Sorry, my mouse isn't working, so I have to go up here on my thing to X off this thing that popped up on me. Nobody else is home. Only Bobby is at home. And Steven has his own computer. He's not going to go into Barb's trailer to go look at porn when Bobby is supposed to be home sleeping before work. So, Bobby is who put those on that computer that was in Bobby's bedroom. That's another thing. How is Steven going to go look up porn in the bedroom that Bobby is allegedly sleeping in? And then it also says this passage demonstrates the need for non-conclusory evidence establishing Bobby was the individual who searched for the specific images of alleged violent pornography. Moreover, to establish Bobby's purported obsession with violence, Avery alleged, quote, 128 searches for the most violent porn images primarily occurred on weekdays when only Bobby was in the Dassey residence, unquote. In support, Avery cited his computer expert's second supplemental affidavit. However, of the searches listed, only 28 of them occurred between 7 a.m. and 3:45 p.m. on a weekday. Then, of those 28 searches, only 3 of them occurred before Halbach's murder. Even accepting Avery's unsupported speculation that, quote, only Bobby had access to the Dassey computer, unquote, during that time frame and conducted the searches, and assuming that the 3 searches were in fact for violent pornography, Avery failed to explain in his post-conviction motion how someone only possibly having searched for pornography 3 times established his theory of motive. That, quote, Bobby had an obsession with violence and therefore was more likely to commit murder, unquote. His allegation is conclusory and speculative. The circuit court found that Avery's motion was insufficiently pled because Avery provided nothing that would establish Bobby was the one who conducted the searches for the pornography found on the Dassey family computer, or that he was even home at the time the searches were conducted. The circuit court also observed the search terms used were generic and broad and did not closely resemble anything about this case. The circuit court noted that there were only a small amount of searches that occurred before Halbach's murder. And there's a footnote. Oh my God, that's a long footnote. In his brief to this court, Avery argues that the circuit court erred by determining only a small number of searches occurred before Halbach's murder. He asserts that, quote, on September 18, 2005, there were 75 searches of violent, child, or underage pornography performed on the Dassey computer, obviously prior to Ms. Halbach's murder, unquote. In support, he does not cite to a fact pled in his post-conviction motion. Instead, he cites to one of the 84 exhibits he attached to his post-conviction motion, specifically a supplemental affidavit from his, quote, police procedure, unquote, expert. It is unclear the foundation for this expert's statement. After all, as Avery pled in his post-conviction motion, his computer expert identified, quote, 128 searches of the most violent porn images, unquote, and that expert's affidavit reveals that none of these searches occurred on September 18, 2005. More importantly, September 18, 2005 was a Sunday, which is when multiple individuals had access to the communal computer. Assuming searches of some kind did occur on Sunday, September 18, 2005, Avery does not explain how these searches can be tied to Bobby. We will not consider this argument further. The court also observed the 2 expert opinions Avery submitted were based on the unsupported assumption that Bobby conducted the searches and were produced without any forensic or psychological examination of Bobby himself. We agree with the circuit court that Avery's post-conviction motion does not sufficiently allege non-conclusory facts that Bobby had motive to kill Halbach. And the footnote for that one says, in his brief to this court, Avery contends that if Bobby's motive was not sexual, quote, the motive for her murder may have been a theft by Bobby of her vehicle and the items within it, unquote. This was not pled in Avery's post-conviction motion. It is also conclusory and speculative. We do not consider this argument further. Let me pause here for a second for a tiny rant. What's Stephen's motive? Why does there not have to be a motive for Stephen, but they have to prove what Bobby's motive was? What is Stephen's motive? Please, somebody tell me what Stephen's motive would be to kill Teresa Halbach, who did nothing to him. If Stephen's going to kill somebody, there's plenty of people who have done him wrong. He had a girlfriend that he loved, that he saw regularly, because he would pick her up from the jail and take her to her DUI classes. He was about to get I haven't thought about this stuff in a while, and I'm really bad with numbers. Was it $200,000 that he was going to be getting? And that was on top of the $36 million that he was suing for, that the depositions just started. So, what would cause Stephen, who has nothing in his past of being violent, running his cousin off the road and pointing a rifle at her does not mean he would kill some random girl. Burning a cat, which people who have followed this case know Stephen did not burn the cat. Stephen took the blame for it. And I know people, there's the serial killers start out by killing animals. Stephen didn't kill the cat. He was there. And so were multiple other people. And so did all those people kill people then? Because a cat was thrown in a fire? There is no motive for Stephen to kill Teresa Halbach. Let me go back to this. We could stop the analysis here. After all, by failing to sufficiently allege non-conclusory facts demonstrating Bobby had motive to kill Halbach, Avery has not established that his newly discovered Sawinski evidence is material for his third-party perpetrator defense. Denny requires that all three, motive, opportunity, and direct connection, be shown before evidence of a third-party perpetrator is admitted at trial. However, in the interest of completeness, we will continue the analysis. We next turn to the second prong of the legitimate tendency test, opportunity. Opportunity, quote, asks whether the alleged third-party perpetrator could have committed the crime in question, unquote. Quote, the defense theory of a third party's involvement will guide the relevance analysis of opportunity evidence in a Denny case, unquote. Sometimes opportunity can be established by simply showing the third party was at the crime scene. Sorry, squirrel. Okay. However, when the theory of how the third party committed the crime requires that person to have carried out a series of complicated and difficult tasks, it is not enough to show the third party's mere presence at the scene and an unaccounted for period of time. Where is that? Have I just not gotten to it yet? No, I haven't. In his present motion, Avery alleged that Bobby killed Halbach on October 31, 2005. And the footnote on that says, in his brief to this court, Avery complains, quote, the circuit court erroneously found that Ms. Halbach was murdered on October 31st, but there is no proof of when Ms. Halbach was murdered up until her remains were found on November 7th, unquote. However, in his post-conviction motion, Avery specifically alleged, quote, on October 31, 2005, the obsessive fantasies of Bobby became a horrible reality when Teresa Halbach was brutally assaulted and murdered by 2 rifle shots to her skull, unquote. There's no proof of anything happening to Teresa Halbach. Nobody knows. And you don't know what day it happened on either. Her own family didn't know she was missing. Even though they live right next door. They paid no attention and didn't know she wasn't home. Therefore, to establish opportunity in this case, Avery, quote, must provide some evidence that Bobby had the realistic ability to engineer such a scenario. Now I am on page 17 of 22. Avery contended that Sawinski's affidavit established Bobby was in possession of Halbach's vehicle and had the, quote, opportunity access to the items that were used in the frame up, unquote. He stated Bobby was in possession of the Halbach vehicle, which contained the crucial evidence of this terrible crime: Ms. Halbach's blood, key, electronic devices, and license plate, which was concealed in another salvage car, and Mr. Avery's carefully deposited blood on the seats and dash and DNA on the hood latch. By being in possession of the vehicle, Bobby was able to control the direction of the investigation. He planted the vehicle on the Avery property after he deposited Mr. Avery's blood and DNA in it. He had Ms. Halbach's key and electronic devices, which ended up in Mr. Avery's bedroom and burn barrel. The Sawinski affidavit, however, only stated that Sawinski saw Bobby and another individual pushing, it's got pushing italicized, pushing a blue-covered RAV4 on November 5, 2005. Nothing in the Sawinski affidavit linked Bobby to Halbach's, it's got Halbach italicized, RAV4, its key, or her electronics. Avery failed to offer anything other than speculation that Bobby possessed Halbach's RAV4, its key, or her electronics. How is it speculation when somebody saw Bobby with the car? That's not speculation. That's eyewitness. What eyewitness is there that Stephen did anything to her? What proof is there Stephen did anything to her? Her keys in his bedroom? So what? That doesn't mean he killed her if her keys in the bedroom. His DNA in her car? That doesn't mean he killed her. So what evidence is there that Stephen did it? Her alleged bones were found behind his garage that's right next to the Yonda Dassey house. How does that prove that Stephen did anything to her? I don't like that there's rules for Stephen but not rules for anybody else. I don't like it. Additionally, although Avery argued Bobby had access to his blood, Avery claimed Bobby knew Avery was bleeding one day and Avery left blood in his trailer sink. Avery only offered conclusory statements and speculation that Bobby would be able to successfully collect and plant Avery's blood in a way that went undetected by crime scene professionals. I differ with Kathleen on this. I do not think Bobby planted the blood. I do not think Bobby planted the key. I think that is law enforcement. And since this is right here, years ago, so this was 2016, my husband has the exact same vacutainers or whatever these things are called. Yeah, vacutainer with EDTA in them. That my husband drew his blood and put it in this container. And when he did that, we videoed it and we took pictures of it. And this was back when we didn't know enough about this, because this was still freshly after Making a Murderer came out. And the big deal was about there was a hole on top. And it's like, so clearly somebody had gotten Stephen's sample and used that to plant blood. And the big deal was, well, that's how you get blood into this container, is that, there's a needle on here, and so it puts a hole on there, right? So that doesn't mean that it was recently tampered with. So that was a bummer. And then, when I've been doing these live videos over the last 9 years, and then I grab this vacutainer every time to show it. I don't know if you can see it now. Look, You can no longer see a hole in the top of this. It has completely resealed itself. So for there to be an obvious spot on the top of a container, a vacuum, that means somebody did put a needle in it recently. Because this thing's been sitting like this since 2016. And now there's no more, you cannot see a hole. And then also my husband's blood has like dried out, and it's, so you can see blood at the top of this, and there's clumps of the blood in there. But there's no more hole at the top of this rubber stopper. So back to what Jerry Buting they were doing when you watched Making a Murderer, where they were like, dun dun dun, look at this. There's a hole on the top of this. So, I'm not saying that's where the blood came from. I'm just saying it still could have. Whatever. All right, back to reading this. Where was I? Bobby was in possession, which contained the Christian. Okay. There we go. Okay. Avery also did not explain how Bobby had access to any of the other forensic evidence in this case. In his post-conviction motion, Avery omitted any allegation that Bobby had access or the ability to collect and transfer his DNA, which was found on Halbach's hood latch and her RAV4 key. And the footnote on that says, in his brief to this court, Avery states that he maintains law enforcement planted the touch DNA in this case. However, in his post-conviction motion, he alleged Bobby, quote, deposited Mr. Avery's ... DNA in the vehicle, unquote. Notice they don't say sweat DNA anymore. Remember that was such a big deal, but once it was shown there's no such thing as sweat DNA, now they're calling it touch DNA. Avery also omitted that police found a bullet inside Avery's garage that contained Halbach's DNA, and the bullet was fired from a rifle that was found inside Avery's trailer. Who gives a fuck? Watch Making a Murderer 2, and you'll see Kathleen Zellner doing her own research, and that bullet went through the garage. You can also see, you can read Raleigh Johnson's testimony, who actually owned Stephen's trailer, owned the garage, owned the land it was on, and owned almost everything in the house, including that rifle, testified that he shot that gun all over the property, not just the land that he owned. He would drive through the salvage yard and shoot at varmints. So, and then the Halbach DNA that was found on that bullet was a waxy substance. So, chapstick. The circuit court observed that, pursuant to Wilson, Avery's theory of Bobby's involvement required Avery to provide evidence that Bobby had the realistic ability to carry out the complicated plan that he alleged was used to frame him. The court noted that Avery, quote, speculates on many points as to how Bobby could have carried out the plan to frame Avery, but the Wilson test requires more, unquote. The court determined Avery, quote, failed to offer any evidence that Bobby had the scientific knowledge to recognize the significance of each piece of the forensic evidence supposedly planted by him, let alone establish that he had the skill to plant that evidence in a way that would stand up to a scientific scrutiny by professional crime scene analysts, unquote. The court concluded that, quote, all of the allegations implicating Bobby in the murder and the framing of Avery are pure speculation and not supported by any evidence submitted by Avery. And there's a footnote, but I'll get to that in a second, because then there's one more sentence that says, we agree with the circuit court. And the footnote says, in its analysis, the circuit court also observed that Avery's new defense theory that Bobby murdered Halbach and framed Avery for the crime failed to acknowledge Bobby's brother, Brendan Dassey. The court observed that Brendan confessed to and was convicted of participating in Halbach's murder. That Brendan, quote, specifically implicated Avery in this crime, unquote, and that Brendan's conviction was affirmed by the appellate court. Brendan wasn't used in Stephen's case. So why would they be talking about Brendan? There's no Brendan in Stephen's case. In Stephen's case, Brendan did it Stephen did it in the library with the candlestick, and Brendan was at home. There was no Brendan in Stephen's case. Ugh. Fucking idiots. On appeal, Avery argues the circuit court erred by referencing Brendan because, quote, Brendan's confession was not introduced into Mr. Avery's trial, and it is wholly improper for the circuit court to have factored the alleged confession into its analysis, unquote. We need not consider this argument because even without Brendan's confession, Avery's post-conviction motion still does not establish Bobby's opportunity under Denny. Are you fucking kidding me? How can two people be tried for the murder of the same person, but in one case the second person doesn't exist? I don't get it. It's so aggravating to me. And that, oh, our bad. Okay, so even if you take Brendan out of the Stephen scenario, he still definitely killed Teresa Halbach. We conclude Bobby's mere presence on the Avery property and the Sawinski affidavit averring Bobby was pushing a RAV4 5 days after Halbach's murder does not establish any fact showing Bobby could have actually accomplished committing Halbach's murder and planting all of the evidence in this case. Nothing in the Sawinski affidavit establishes Bobby was in possession of the evidence that Avery asserts was used to frame him. In short, Avery's post-conviction motion fails to allege sufficient facts to support his theory that Bobby had opportunity, that he could have killed Halbach and framed Avery for it. We could again stop the analysis here. In his post-conviction motion, Avery has already failed to sufficiently plead 2 prongs of the Denny test. Once more, in the interest of completeness, we will continue the analysis. Oh, they make it sound like they're just so smart. The third prong of the legitimate tendency test is a direct connection. Direct connection is assessed by considering, quote, the proffered evidence in conjunction with all other evidence to determine whether, under the totality of the circumstances, the evidence suggests that a third-party perpetrator actually committed, they have that italicized, the crime, unquote, and takes the defendant's theory, quote, beyond mere speculation, unquote. Quote, no bright lines can be drawn as to what constitutes a third party's direct connection to a crime, unquote. But it must be more than, quote, a connection between the third party and the crime. It requires, quote, some connection between the third party and the perpetration of, that's italicized, the crime, unquote. In his post-conviction motion, Avery argued, quote, the Sawinski evidence demonstrates that Bobby could have committed the murder because he is in possession of Ms. Halbach's vehicle where the murder likely occurred, as evidenced by Ms. Halbach's blood in the vehicle. The vehicle is a key piece of evidence in the crime, unquote. And where is the fucking car? The circuit court disagreed. It stated, quote, assuming for the purposes of this motion that everything averred to in the Sawinski affidavit is true, the defendant is incorrect in his assertion that the facts in the affidavit provide a direct link between Bobby and the Halbach murder. The defendant asserts that ipso facto, if Bobby was in possession of the victim's car that night, he must also have been the individual who committed the murder. No evidence submitted by the defendant supports this conclusion. Even if Bobby was found in the possession of the victim's automobile on the night of November 5, 2005, there is only speculation and no evidence to prove that Bobby was in possession of the car or that he had exclusive control over the vehicle prior to that night." Unquote. We agree with the circuit court. Sawinski's averments that he purportedly saw Bobby and someone else pushing a RAV4 on November 5 days after Halbach's murder. Again, nobody knows when she was murdered, if she was murdered, nor any factual link between Bobby and any of the forensic evidence. At most, Sawinski's affidavit establishes a possible, they have that italicized, quote, "connection between the third party and the crime," unquote. However, that is not enough. Avery's post-conviction motion does not sufficiently allege facts that demonstrate Bobby had a quote direct connection, unquote, to murdering Halbach and framing Avery for it. Because Avery's post-conviction motion did not allege sufficient facts to satisfy the Denny requirements for third-party perpetrator evidence, the Sawinski evidence is not material and therefore does not satisfy the newly discovered evidence test. We therefore do not determine whether the, quote, "evidence is not merely cumulative," unquote, the fourth factor, or whether a reasonable probability exists that a different result would be reached at a new trial. You don't know what a jury would do, so nobody can say what a jury would take into account and how they would rule. Avery's motion is insufficiently pled. We pause here to discuss the affidavit from Barash. As stated previously, after briefing on Avery's post-conviction motion concluded, Avery filed an affidavit from Barash. Avery's post-conviction counsel moved to amend a single paragraph in the post-conviction motion so that the amended paragraph would read, quote, "Mr. Sawinski, or the Sawinski evidence provided by Mr. Sawinski to Mr. Avery's current post-conviction counsel is newly discovered evidence, which provides the missing direct connection between Bobby and Ms. Halbach's murder, making him a Denny suspect. Mr. Thomas Barash corroborates the previously filed affidavit of Thomas Sawinski that Bobby Dassey was driving the RAV4 vehicle of Teresa Halbach on Friday night, November 4th, or early Saturday morning after her disappearance on October 31, 2005, unquote. The circuit court analyzed Barash's affidavit and determined nothing in Barash's affidavit linked Bobby to Halbach's murder. We conclude Avery's motion is insufficiently pled in regard to the Barash affidavit. Avery referenced Barash one time in the entirety of his post-conviction motion. He did not offer any analysis or assertions within his motion as to how Barash's affidavit met the four criteria of newly discovered evidence or established a reasonable probability that a different result would be reached at trial. Avery did not sufficiently plead the Barash affidavit as newly discovered evidence. In any event, we agree with the circuit court that Barash's affidavit does not link Bobby to Halbach's murder. Finally, Avery argues the circuit court made a variety of factual errors in its written decision that are unsupported by the record. We have already addressed some of these purported errors. Other examples include that the court referred to Bobby as Brian at one point in its decision, stated Brendan was forensically linked to the crime, stated Halbach's bones were found in Avery's burn barrel, her electronics were found there, her bones were found in multiple locations, including Avery's burn pit, and stated, quote, bone fragments from almost every bone in the human body, unquote, were found in the burn pit. This statement, however, was proven at trial by the forensic anthropologist, don't get me started on that chick, who found at least one fragment from nearly every bone in the human body within the burn pit. We have reviewed the purported errors and conclude they have no bearing on the Circuit Court's denial of Avery's post-conviction motion. By the court, order affirmed. This opinion will not be published. That is the end of that. So, as usual, they're just going to continue covering for each other. And nobody is going to overturn this injustice. And so Stephen sits in there and rots. And they took him away from his parents once, and he lost his wife and his children in that 18 years. And now they took him this time, and I mean, it did him a favor to end his relationship with that wackadoo. His mother has died, and his dad's health is not well. And he gets older every day. Stephen gets older every day. This is ridiculous. It's not surprising, but it just sucks. I was really hopeful this time that it would at least get into court and hear this new evidence. I feel horrible for Stephen. Kathleen Zellner. This is another question we get all the time. Kathleen Zellner is still on Stephen's case. She's not leaving Stephen's case. And she made a post today that she'll go to the Supreme Court next. So Stephen will sit in there for more years while we wait again. And then with Brendan's case is harder than Stephen's because Brendan confessed. We all know it was a coerced confession, and they lied to Brendan and had Brendan lie. But Brendan, really, all he has left is clemency. And the governor has said he's not going to give it to Brendan. So this is where we are on Stephen's case. Let me remind everybody before I get yelled at by Christopher. I wrote a book, Wrongfully Abused, Making an Advocate for Steven Avery. This is available on Amazon. I self-published it on Amazon. This is about my history with the case and what Stephen's family and other guilters and such have done to me. So if you have any interest in learning about me, purchase my book, Wrongfully Abused, by Jax West on Amazon. And Susan is saying, what are the next steps now? Kathleen says she's going to the Supreme Court. So, but the Supreme Court takes such a teeny tiny bit of cases that are submitted to them. So it sucks so hard. So just more waiting. But while it frustrates you, it frustrates me. Imagine being Stephen. Before I end this, I'm going to move on to another case that people always get mad at me when I talk about other cases. But Kathleen Zellner is also the attorney on this case. This is an Illinois case. Melissa Kaluzinski. Melissa. Oh my God, how many pictures do I have with Melissa? Melissa. Melissa. There are 2 episodes of 48 Hours that they have done on the Melissa Kalusinski case. Kalusinski is Kalusinski. One is called The Fight for Melissa. One is called Blaming Melissa. It is done by Erin Moriarty of 48 Hours. And she has been working on Melissa's case again. Erin Moriarty is very tight with Kathleen Zellner. Kathleen always works with Erin on this. And so we just found out today that this Saturday, 48 Hours, that's on CBS, is airing a new episode on Melissa's case. They are calling it, what are they calling it? I put it on Justice with Jax. What the title of it is, but it is here in Chicago. 48 Hours, they always put 2 episodes on Saturday, 2 1-hour episodes, and so the Melissa one is the second hour. So it airs at 9 p.m. here in Chicago Central Time. So if you are interested in another wrongful conviction case that Kathleen Zellner is the attorney on, watch 48 Hours this Saturday. What is the date of this? Is that the 18th? I can't remember. Today's the 15th, 16th, 17th, 18th. Okay. So January 18th. Watch that. I can't tell you what's going to be in there. But it's good. And where Melissa's case is currently is Kathleen filed for clemency for Melissa. So we're waiting to hear from the governor. And Melissa's been in prison for 15 years. But yeah, so there you go. My little plug for, and if you want to know more about Melissa's case, I've got the Justice with Jax Facebook page and group. I shared some of the links to videos and where you can see Melissa's interrogation and such. So 48 Hours on Saturday. Watch about Melissa Kalusinski and Stephen. Let me just wait. Stephen. You guys don't care about Marnie Yang because she's not Kathleen Zellner, but we had court for Marnie the other day too that I attended. But Marnie, it was just, now we're setting another date, set another date that we've been doing for years. Our system is so horrible. I hate how they make these people wait forever. Horrible. And yeah, I feel horrible for Stephen. So okay, I am going to go. Thank you everybody for joining me. And if you are new to Steven Avery Project, you can look in our archives in the tons of videos we've done over the years. We've got even more in our closed group that's called MAM Gossip, where I've taken people, I've taken you on field trips to every place in Manitowoc. So you can watch our old videos or plenty of, you can see, I don't know if it was here on, no, it was here on Steven Avery Project, where I interviewed Steven's cousin, Kim, and some things that she says about the family. So, Susan's asking me what sort of time frame do they have on that? I don't know. I sadly I don't know. I don't know the time frame. It seems like they always have forever to just drag this out. I hate it. All right. Thank you, everybody. If anything happens on Steven's case, We try to get it posted as soon as possible. Thank you to the people who submitted to me because I'm at work during the day, so um, I didn't even get this stuff first. Somebody sent it to me, so to let me know, so for me to post it. So if you ever find any news on this case and it is not posted here, please send our way. You can either Facebook message it to Stephen Avery Project. You can email me at either official Stephen Avery Project at gmail.com or justicewithjax@gmail.com. And if you are interested in the Melissa Kaluzinski case that I plugged, you can go over to Justice with Jax. And after that 48 hours episode airs, I'll probably be doing a live video to discuss what was in there. And maybe I'll schedule to do something with Melissa's dad too. Um, all right. Oh, shoot. I was using my mouse to go to try to end this thing, and the mouse isn't working, so I have to do it up here on the laptop. But all right, thank you, everybody. And investigation continues.